Extraction of Earth's resources has been a trait of man since basically the beginning. Starting slowly enough, it would be things like burning sticks to stay warm, and this would progress to using mud to build homes in order to stay out of the elements, or just entering cave systems and using the ground above to do the same. As we continued down into the Earth, eventually someone, somewhere, would happen upon a substance that would change the game entirely and eventually propel us into the stars. Refining this material, this would lead to things like the Bronze Age, which would come to an abrupt end for unknown reasons, strangely enough. Coming back, the Iron Age would then begin as we began working with a tougher metal and building armors and tools to make life easier. But eventually, another resource would be discovered that would raise our tech level even higher. Electricity is something most of us utilize in some form or fashion, and if you're listening to this right now, I can safely say we are all using it actually right this minute. This energy allows us to power our homes, vehicles, devices, medical equipment, and everything that requires a computer, and we can store it for periods of time in the form of chemical reactions and batteries. But all of this is largely made possible due to humanity pulling up copper from the ground. Copper, silver, and gold all transfer electricity and heat with great efficiency, but the issue lies in the fact that, silver and gold are considered precious metals. Copper is one of your sort of run-of-the-mill type of metals. While it is highly sought after by crackheads in Philadelphia, for the most part it's sort of a bargain metal, and nowadays it is utilized as a great way to transfer electricity that our society needs to operate, and seeing as it's relatively plentiful in various parts of the world, many mines have been opened up in order to pull it up and out to put it on the world market. The discovery of copper and its subsequent mining has led to many countries' own economical booms, but with it, issues have begun to arise. In some areas where the regulations are not as strict or the workers are ignored when suggesting there is a problem, this can lead to workers being crushed by cave-ins and, at worst, a company being fined for the issue. But then making record profits, meaning that it's not really that big of a deal if they catch a fine every once in a while. In August of 2010, a mine collapse would take place in Chile, I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it, trapping 33 men under the ground 700 meters deep. As the rescue efforts continued at a painfully slow pace, rations would begin to run low, and over time, it would come out that the mine itself was exceedingly unsafe, and the higher-ups had refused to listen to those who were actually working, the mine. So in today's episode, let's discuss the 2010 Copiapo mining accident. But before getting into it, I want to say thank you guys for all your support on this channel. We did in fact pass 100,000 subscribers recently and are continuing to climb. I think my plaque is coming in soon according to UPS, so really, I thank you guys for watching and giving this channel a chance. If you'd like me to cover something specifically, I recently had a hacking issue and I had to reset my computer, so I lost all my suggestions that you guys have made over the last few months. So if you want me to look into something and cover something, just drop it in the comments and I will write it down. But until then, let's get to it. So as Chilean workers went into the mines on August 5th, 2010, it was really just like any other day. Despite complaints launched to the higher-ups about the unsafe working conditions and the instability of the mine, this would largely fall on deaf ears because, again, the fines imposed were not as bad as to negate the profit being made. Heading inside the mine, it was located in the Atacama Desert, just 45 miles north of the capital of Copiapo in northern Chile. Chile itself is a country that is plentiful with copper and has for quite some time been the world's top producer once it was discovered in the mountains and discovered that it was full of the metal, but that has not come without a price for the workers. On average, 34 people per year since the year 2000 have been crushed or just in general have shuffled their mortal coil due to mining accidents. In 2008, this apparently had maxed out to around 43 people, which would be a warning of things to come. Prior to the collapse, there were already signs that this company, the San Esteban Mining Company, had some major issues. Their mines were notorious for being quite dangerous and not possessing the necessary safety measures that would keep the mine up and the people protected. Which, I've been in caves personally, that is an entirely just horrifying measure, and it's definitely in the top 10 ways of worst ways to go. In fact, this company has been fined over 42 times between 2004 and 2010 for having several safety regulation issues and being non-compliant. I mean, I get it. You do what you have to do to feed your family, but good lord, that is not a place I'd like to be working for. That mine would collapse in 2010 and was actually shut down temporarily in 2007 when a miner was taken out and the company was sued, but they would reopen quickly in 2008 again with little issue, and this is even when the issue was not addressed, because profits. As the budget constraints, and I use that term with as much derision as possible, continued, only 3 inspectors for 884 mines currently in operation were hired and working. This means that each inspector would be responsible for about 295 mines. Well, actually, it's like 294.6. But as you might guess, this would be a little overwhelming. I mean, you could visit 1 mine a day, and if you took off things like holiday and weekends, you would still not be able to visit everything. Because of this, if an inspector did actually get to your mine, they wouldn't have much time to make sure the mine was in compliance, and things could be easily overlooked. That's just too much work and not enough people to cover it. However, what the inspectors couldn't find, the workers could easily see on a daily basis. The trade union that represents San Jose's miners would speak up against the issue several times, saying that there were unsafe working conditions, but the company's management would largely ignore them, and then that would go on to them being accused of not listening to the voice of the workers, but they still said that there was no danger or risk there. This job is not one without its benefits, however. Due to likely the danger associated with it, the process of mining copper is highly lucrative and one of the highest paid in the country concerning being a worker in the mines. In fact, it paid 20% more. Now, the thing to note about this entire process is that it's not all bad. A lot of the larger mining companies do actually have relatively good safety records, but it would be the smaller companies that would go off and almost just completely ignore the standards that were set by the larger companies because, money. But around 2 p.m. on August 5th, 2010, the neglect of countless safety regulations and the upkeep of the mine in general would cause the mine to finally collapse. This collapse would cause all the miners within working at that time to be trapped, except for one ore trucker who was able to escape by driving the helical roadway out of the way he came back out onto the surface. And that must have been one hell of a drive. I mean, good lord, I don't know if you guys know this, but I'm a bit of a nerd. And this is going to sound cringe probably, but it's like literally when you're driving in the ending of Halo 3 and everything's falling around you. This is almost too nerdy to include. I'm going to include it just so you guys know. Anyways, that's what I imagine it was like. Probably way more horrifying. Guaranteed to be way more horrifying. Anyways, due to the collapse, a thick cloud of dust would be kicked up, reportedly blinding the men for over 6 hours due to visibility basically being zero at this point in time, being in a dark cave, or mine, and then your flashlights not really being able to pierce the thickness of this dust. Some men would attempt to escape by the established ventilation shafts, but the ladders that were supposed to be in place during such an event as this were absent, because ladders are expensive. God, this company sucks. At this point, a shift supervisor, also who was a Giga Chad, would take over the situation and gather the men in the area of the mine, which was called the refuge, which was its own little room. They would then gather any resources they had, which was stocked in that room, which was supposedly enough for about 2 or 3 days. Looking at the dire situation before them and the complete lack of preparedness concerning resources, which I'm not surprised were skimped out on, it became clear that the men could not stay there very long. Teams would be sent out in the surrounding area in an attempt to find any way out possible of this mine, but time after time the teams would be met with disappointment as it became rapidly apparent they were unequivocally stuck. Now, this would obviously be rather alarming to the men, but what were you supposed to do? So, they would remain within the mines, hoping for rescue. Which, given how little the company appeared to care about the upkeep of their mines, and the knowledge that they had, many before them basically have met their end in these mines, the company would just kind of pay a fine and move on. So that was probably not very comforting to these men who were just stuck down there. But shortly after the cave-in, to my surprise, and probably everyone listening to this, an actual rescue attempt would be launched. And I'm going to go ahead and say it's probably because one guy made it out, and it was better to just go rescue everybody and just not have to deal with that than just be like, oh, well, everybody's already gone, it's already confirmed, and then just say that to the families. That basically there was a witness. So, am I being a little salty about the oversights and safety? Maybe, but it seems like an easy fix for people working in the actual dangerous conditions, rather than just completely negating it and being that guy who doesn't have their skin on the line and being like, oh, it's totally fine, I'm above ground. Anyways, I'm just saying, huge tools working at the top. So any of the rescuers who were sent out there would likely be met with the first major obstacle, which was a large rock fall in the main entryway. Again, that truck driver from earlier must have been flying out of there because this thing was collapsed right up till the beginning. So each passage they searched for at this point was also blocked. But what was worse is there was still activity within the rock, and it continued to move, so any passage that they found was dangerous for them and threatened to not remain open for very long, which could take the rescuers' lives. A second collapse would take place on the 7th, to which the tactic would now change. Rather than just try to find a way to the men through an opening that surely those men would have probably already found themselves considering they just had time to search, they would now employ the use of heavy machinery through ventilation shafts. This was quickly halted, however, because as they kept trying to access these ventilation shafts, the rock would move more, and then that would cause some concern that if any of the men were alive down there, they would end up crushing them by accident through another subsequent collapse. Around this initial time frame, Chile was dealing with its own separate but similar issues at large. The government had apparently botched the handling of the recent Chilean earthquake and a recent tsunami, and so people were not very happy. This event started to push tempers to a boiling point as criticism began to mount, which would cause Chile's president, Sebastián Piñera, to cut an official trip short and return to Chile to visit the mine. Now, when the leader of your country comes to visit your mine after an event like this, you're completely screwed. But this also began to raise international attention that these men were still trapped. Abandoning the ventilation shafts, boreholes would be made about 16 centimeters or 6.3 inches in diameter. These drills were sent down in an effort to locate the miners and figure out if any of them were actually still alive, and if they were, where were they located? But of course there was an issue with this as well. First, the maps that showed where everything were completely outdated and incorrect, so that made things increasingly difficult. Along with that, the boreholes tended to drift off target given how deep the men were. So drifting off like an inch at a time when you hit like a really hard rock or something would have large consequences the further down it went, as they kept running into hard rock and drifting and not ending up in the areas that they actually thought they were. On the 19th, they would reach an area where specifically they assumed the miners would have been, but they were met with nothing. Absolutely no signs of life. But then 3 days later, an 8th borehole finally broke through at around 688 meters or 2,257 feet at a ramp near a shelter where the men had taken refuge. The men had apparently been hearing the drills for days, but painfully they could never locate them because they were in the wrong area. However, this one sounded different, so they began writing notes to pin to the drill when it was brought back up. And then, after it finally breached, they also began tapping on the drill to let everybody know that they were down there. As the rescuers brought the drill back up, they found a note placed on it that said, "All 33 of us are fine in the shelter." Knowing that they had found the men and had actually found all of them, rescuers, the miners, and their families were all elated as a camera was sent down just a few hours later to confirm their location. The area that the men were trapped was actually somewhat advantageous for them. While they were gathered in the refuge room, they had an area of about 50 square meters or about 540 square feet that had 2 long benches on them for them to sit and lie down on if needed, as well as the aforementioned food. The only issue was due to the ventilation problems. They would have to move out into the tunnel area where they had a 2-kilometer area of open tunnels to move around in. Of course, due to their low supplies, they likely did very little moving around to conserve as much energy as possible, and then only use that energy to look for escape points, but these tunnels also meant that they could kind of pick an area to go drop the kids off at the pool, so infection would not become a problem. They had formed a democracy that everyone got 1 vote on how to move ahead, so there were 33 of them, 16 plus 1 was the majority, and they each were responsible for keeping morale up due to just how dire their situation was. It would be easy to panic and then start heading down a pretty dark road in your mind being trapped in a mine like that. And the more panicked you were, the more aggressive you might become, which that's just basic human psychology. Once figuring out their location, a camera was sent down in order to get a look at how they were doing physically, which they weren't doing too well. The men's beards had all grown in, they were pretty disheveled and had lost a fair bit of weight. They had all of their shirts off by this point, and some of them looked more thin than others. Well, likely this was due to the fact they were thinner to begin with, and because they had, as mentioned, a GigaChat leader, everything was being doled out equally. After finding them, they would conduct somewhat of an interview as their leader, Luis Uzura, would downplay the hunger that they were experiencing as well as the despair some of the men were exhibiting. He would go on to say that they were just waiting for them to rescue them. He would counsel the men and attempt to instill a philosophical acceptance of fate so that they could accept their situation and move on to embrace essential tasks of survival. Again, this dude actually knows how to lead, so that's probably why it turned out as well as it did. There were several men who were instrumental in also helping everyone kind of keep their cool down there during the cave-in and the subsequent entrapment. Luis Urza, 54, is a shift foreman who immediately recognized the gravity of the situation and the difficulty of any rescue attempt. He gathered the men in a secure refuge, then organized them and their meager resources to cope with a long-term survival situation. Just after the incident, he led 3 men to scout the tunnel. After confirming the situation, he made detailed maps of the area to aid the rescue effort. He directed the underground aspects of the rescue operation and coordinated closely with engineers on the surface over teleconference links. Florencio Avalos, second in command of the group, assisted Urzua in organizing the men. Because of his experience, physical fitness, and emotional stability, he was selected as the first miner to ride the rescue capsule to the surface in case of complications during the 15-minute ascent in the cramped shaft. Naturally shy, he served as the camera operator for videos sent up to the miners' families. He was trapped along with his younger brother, Renan. Yanni Barrios became the medic of the trapped miners due to his 6 months of training when he took care of his elderly mother. He served the group by monitoring their health and providing detailed medical reports to the team of doctors on the surface. His fellow miners jokingly referred to him as Dr. House, which is reference to American TV medical drama character. Mario Gomez, the eldest miner, became the religious leader of the group, organizing a chapel with a shrine containing statues of saints as well as aiding counseling efforts by psychologists on the surface. Jose Henriquez, a preacher and a miner for 33 years, served as the miners' pastor and organized daily prayers. Mario Sepulveda served as the energetic host of the miners' video journals that were sent to the surface to reassure the world that they were doing well. The local media dubbed him Super Mario after Super Mario Bros. Video game for his energy, wit, and humor. And Ario Tacona served as the group's communication specialist, installing and maintaining the underground portion of telephone and video conferencing systems sent down from the surface team. Now, far be it for me to think I know everything in the world, but after making contact and finding the men, it would take another day to get them a glucose solution to stabilize their blood sugar and a medication to prevent stomach ulcers from starvation. I know it took them like a day, but as soon as the drill was brought up with a note, that's some stuff that you want to just have on hand at that point, I imagine. But the men had made their 2 to 3 days of food last all the way up until they were found, which is pretty impressive. But at this point, they were fully reliant on food from the surface being sent down to them. And from here, regular food would begin to be delivered so that the men did not develop refeeding syndrome. So what is refeeding syndrome, real quick, I can hear you asking? Refeeding syndrome is essentially when a person has been deprived of food for so long that when they eat solid food, it disrupts the delicate balance of homeostasis that they have developed with their starvation. When this happens, their electrolytes are overwhelmed and they have hypophosphatemia. Hypo meaning low, phospho meaning phosphorus, and emia meaning presence in the blood. So low phosphorus presence in the blood. I totally get that from Chubby Emu, by the way. I'm not taking credit for that breakdown. So anyways, this can result in metabolic and clinical complications. This can present with symptoms such as double vision, swallowing problems, trouble breathing, kidney dysfunction, muscle weakness, hypotension, nausea and vomiting, cardiomyopathy, seizures, confusion, disorientation, and in the worst cases, it can just straight up stop your heart from beating due to the imbalances of electrolytes. Typically, all it takes is around 10 days of not eating and being undernourished, and then eating a big meal, so to speak, and this can cause you to develop this. Glucose paste with electrolytes in the paste itself is sent down to stabilize the men's bodies so that regular food can be eaten after that. One of the insidious things is that people really don't realize is once they're rescued from like a horrible situation, they would end up succumbing to refeeding syndrome. Possibly because the rescuers didn't even know. And then those that are rescued and don't get fed like immediately felt like they were continuing to be starved, but it was for their own survival because the rescuers knew if we feed them too quickly, it's going to result in them basically just succumbing to this. So either way, not a great situation to be in biologically, but you can recover from it. The hits from here would keep coming for all of the men, however. A plan would be devised in order to get them out, but it would take longer than anyone would have hoped. Rescuers did not want to relay this information, but they deserved to know. The extraction could take months, with the actual time frame putting them close to Christmas before they would all be pulled out. The men would be briefed on the 25th of August and took the news somewhat well, better than what could be expected. The process would then begin, and this would give the men hope, but to maintain that hope, they were asked to partake on the other side of the rescue effort in their own rescue. This would keep their minds occupied on getting out of there and keep them busy. On top of this, around the same time, it became apparent that environmentally, they need to start getting an area for them to basically set up so that they can take the Browns to the Super Bowl. Seeing the similarities to what astronauts face, a team of NASA scientists were sent from the United States to provide assistance. This team included 2 physicians, 1 psychologist, and 1 engineer, so not really scientists, but just a bunch of nerds from NASA to help out. Along with this, the men's families were able to send them letters, although they were highly censored and asked to keep it light and cheerful so that they would not psychologically inflict damage on the men without meaning to. With the plan set, they would now officially begin the rescue process. The plan was based on a comprehensive model that was successful in the rescue of the 2002 U.S. Q Creek mine. That was also a rescue that was actually based on the 1963 German Wunder van Legend rescue. I'm pretty sure that was pronounced incorrectly. Take a shot every time I say rescue in this video. You will need to be rescued yourself. They would then use these 3 drilling technologies to create boreholes wide enough to raise the miners in a custom-designed rescue pod as quickly as possible. Around this time, there was concern that another collapse was imminent, so they needed to do this quickly, and this presented a non-ideal situation. The rescue plan would take place in 3 separate plans. As 3 boreholes were drilled, they became known as Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. The guy who comes up with the cool names for plans was out of the country at this time. Plan A would drill a depth of 702 meters at 90 degrees. Plan B would dig to 638 meters at 82 degrees. Plan C would dig at 597 meters at 85 degrees. Plan B would be the only one that would actually successfully reach the miners. They would then reach them in with an escape shaft. It was noted that at this point, it was an international effort with machines coming from across the world to dig the boreholes, with this one in particular coming from the United States. At 8:05 on October 9th, 2010, Plan B's Schramm T-130XD would reach the miners way ahead of schedule because it was American-made, baby! The other lesser drills lagged behind because they're from other countries, and they ran into several issues. By the way, I don't know if you know this about me, this is basically just American propaganda disguised as a YouTube channel. While this was taking place, technicians began working on creating rescue capsules that would pull the men out of the mine. The pods dubbed Phoenix 1, 2, and 3 were created by a Chilean shipping yard, and also had way cooler names because they were named by the Navy, which was in kind of conjunction with NASA's input at this point. Phoenix, because the men rose from the ashes. It's all coming together. Phoenix 2 would be the one that was used and had a reinforced roof, oxygen supply, lighting, escape hatch in case the capsule became stuck, wheels to make it smoother, and video and voice communications. While the digging process finished on October 9th, it took another 3 days, leading into October 12th for the rescue to begin. They had to encase the sides of the borehole in order for it to not fail and cause another cave-in. Initially, they were going to do around 100 to 200 meters deep, but with all the hard rock, they really only had to do the first 56 meters, which put them ahead of schedule. With everything ready, the rescue effort to retrieve the miners would begin on Tuesday, the 12th of October at 7 p.m. A 3-hour delay would commence to ensure that it was safe before it officially started. The original plan called for 2 rescue workers to descend into the mine before bringing the first miner up to the surface. However, to avoid delay, rescuers decided to bring a miner to the surface in the returning capsule that they had taken Gonzalez down in. An empty trial run had taken place the previous day, with the capsule stopping just 15 meters or 49 feet before the end of the shaft. 15 minutes later, after a further safety check, miner Florencio Avalos began his ascent from the mine. TV cameras both inside the mine and on the surface captured the event and broadcast it worldwide. Urzua was the last to actually come up, and again, that's because, was it first in, last out? Baller. Each transit of the capsule, whether up or down, was projected to take roughly about 15 minutes, giving a total time of 33 hours for the rescue operation. In practice, after the capsule's first few transit, it became apparent that the trip might be shorter than projected 15 minutes, and each rescue cycle could take less than actually like an hour entirely. As the 18th miner was brought to the surface, Chilean mining minister Lawrence Goulburn said, "We have advanced at a faster time than we originally planned. I foresee we might conclude the whole operation before tonight." After stepping free from the rescuers and greeting his son, Urzua embraced Piñera and said, "I've delivered to you this shift of workers, as we agreed I would." The president replied, "I gladly receive your shift because you completed your duty, leaving last like a good captain." Piñera went on to say, "You are not the same after this, and Chile won't be the same either." A large Chilean flag that had hung in the mine chamber during the rescue was brought up by Luis Azura. Once all the miners had been extracted, the rescuers in the mine chamber displayed a banner reading "Mission Cumplida Chile," mission accomplished Chile. Manuel Gonzalez was the first rescuer down and the last up, spending 25 hours and 14 minutes in the mine. Rescuers needing to sleep did so in the mine to avoid tying up the capsule on rescue day, delaying journeys to the surface, which no thanks, because they were still worried about a cave-in. So, when the last rescuer surfaced, Pinera covered the top of the rescue shaft with a metal lid. Although Phoenix 2 made 39 round trips, traveling all total distance of around 50 kilometers or around 31 miles. Now, the thing about life is, it's pretty bittersweet. There were some good outcomes from this, and there were some bad outcomes. The men were all released from the hospital just a few days later, as it was said that they had coped unusually well with the stress. The psychologists, though, stated, however, that they may still have a form of PTSD, it just hasn't presented itself yet. A lot of the men at first enjoyed the fame, but that soon turned sour as they found out they couldn't get jobs as a miner anymore because the other companies out there wouldn't hire them for fear of their mental health issues. On top of that, some would ultimately turn to substances to cope, while others kind of seemed to turn out okay. Despite Super Mario being like super energetic and like a good guy overall, he apparently, after this had concluded, struggled with thoughts of ending himself afterwards, so that's not really good. But that's the importance of debriefing after an event that activates your fight or flight for a continued period of time. Physically, you're fine. Psychologically, it's a whole different story, and there are people with different resilience levels that, for one thing, that could absolutely destroy a person might not be a big deal to the other person, and then put both of those same people in a different situation, and it could be completely reversed. It just depends. But good things did come out of this, and that is the company had their entire leadership fired. A lawsuit would be filed against the San Esteban mining company by the relatives of those trapped. A judge would freeze around $2 million in assets, but the company claimed they could not pay salaries, which was untrue allegedly. On the 21st of October, San Esteban Mining Company Operations Chief Carlos Manila and mine manager Pedro Sumovic issued a signed public statement insisting that no company official had the slightest indication that a catastrophe could occur. Right. Except you had all those people literally filing formal complaints saying, hey, this thing is going to collapse. Anyways, miner Jorge Gallardo asserted that there was no way the owners could have been unaware of the situation since he recorded everything and his daily safety reports were signed by Pinilla in person. Rescued miner Victor Zamora commented, "What made me sad was that the people were dying because the company did not want to have something safer and only thought about money." Since then, many reforms have taken place to fix the massive oversights for smaller and larger mine owners alike. Safety methods have gotten better through shared exchange of knowledge concerning how to structure mines to increase the likelihood of a mine not caving in, and this has ensured a number of deaths per year has gone down dramatically, and in general, it's safer for workers to continue to do their job. By comparison, mines in the UK, for instance, are rated an A3, where now Chile holds a rating of A2, the highest in South America.